Good morning and good afternoon and good evening. So this Dharma talk is titled today, it's a how-to talk, which I rarely, excuse me. I guess I get quite a few of those, how to do this and that. So how to cut desire and attachment. And this comes, of course, from the fourth of the four reminders, the homes, friends, wealth, and comforts of samsara, the constant torment of the three sufferings. Just like a feast before the executioner leads you to your death, will cut desire and attachment. I will cut desire and attachment. I will cut desire and attachment and attain enlightenment through exertion. So how in the hell do you cut desire and attachment? That's difficult, because if we go at it directly and just try to stop desiring, find the desire and notice the grasping, notice the desire, the wish for something else, the hope for something else. And if we try to intercept it there, it's like there's too much momentum already. There's too much momentum from repetition of grasping since you were a child. I want that. I want that. I want milk. I want a toy. I want that. I want that. I want that. Watch any child. You have a good, that's why we hired Rumi. So you could watch them want stuff. You notice it's very primitive, but it's very sophisticated also. It's if you try to substitute what he wants for something else, he's not about to settle for that. He knows what he wants. He wants that. So how do we cut desire and attachment? It sounds very abrupt, and who knows what the translation was originally from from the original sources for that. Pardon my throat clearing. It seems that what we need to do is to get very familiar with tanha, or a desire, or wanting that, wanting that, and not wanting that. The other kind of desire is to want something to stay back, want something to. It's also grasping at in a negative way. And each of us has our own particular scenario, our own stage set, our own actors and comedians and tragedians and so on, all on stage, all pushing and pulling. And for this needs to happen. This is wrong. This is not opening up in the right way. This is shutting down in a way that is not going to. It's a constant commentary on our dilemma. Philosophers go towards it and explain. Historians explain. We explain. I quite often say, and I'll say now, don't explain anything. Don't explain unless it's forced on you by your thinking process, unless you jump into some kind of explanation, justification, validation, elucidation, and all the other Asians about this. Anytime something arises, desire, anything other than just the feeling of the desire itself will take you in an area where if you had the sharpest knife in the world, you couldn't cut desire, because you have what? Ignored. You've dismissed it without even knowing you've done that. So you know where I'm going with this, and I'll circle back around several times probably, but it is always about awareness. It is always about the awareness of the desire, the awareness of the attachment. It's actually all of the areas in that area where you personally, any one of you, any one of me, hold on to something in a certain way. So it seems necessary to see the way we approach it, to see the approach, to see it, catch it as it's arising. And that's very difficult to do, because once it's on its way, it's the momentum. It's like when anger arises, you can't intercept anger. It's an interesting precept. I think, what is it, the 9th of the 10 great precepts said, don't get angry. That's always been extremely funny to me when I first heard it. It was even funny then. So cut desire and attachment. So if you can see the desire, if the wish or the other desire, the doubled up aspect of desire, the desire not to desire, if you can see the way in which that works, then you start to see the weak points of that. You start to see the area that actually you might be able to cut that. But you would have to first be very aware of the structure of your personal, any one of you, your personal way of moving away from what is real and authentic and genuine, which is not separate. The way you move away from that into some kind of authoritarian consciousness we call ego, or the bully mind, because of all the power there, we think that we can push ourselves, we can be stubborn. This is not discipline. I'm not saying it isn't taught that way and wasn't taught that way a couple thousand years ago. Of course it was. Different kind of society, different structure, a different way of talking. And so if you work with this in a way that is through the three prajna principles, Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, sit down, look at it, and see what it is. So those sounds very simple. I like to talk about it that way because it's good to do the simplicity part, since when we get into that labyrinth, it seems very, very complicated. So you need to return to square one. When I say that, this is one of Trungpa Rinpoche's, once he heard that phrase, got very attached to saying return to square one. And also that seems to be the basic point. That was his phrase filler. So what do? We return to the cushion, sit down, hold still, and observe samadhi. Observe samadhi. Not to the observer and what is being observed. You will not have a witness there to witness the samadhi or the not separation of consciousness. If you do, then we've got that little mini tyrant in the seventh consciousness trying to get credit for something, trying to show up as I won't mess with anything. I just want to be in there to witness your non-duality. So it seems necessary to repeat this, to come back, look at it over and over again. And actually, there's a possibility there that one could, rather than get rid of desire, you could actually begin to have the thought of enlightenment or bodhicitta, or the mind of kindness and compassion could begin to arise within your mind stream for yourself. If you're trying to abandon your own suffering so that you can be a really nice person and go out and help others, this is a very fancy form of delusion. And, a person without help, I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but without some kind of a structure or algorithm like Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, pretty difficult to do that on your own. If someone does awaken on their own, so to speak, and doesn't end up becoming a Pratyeka Buddha or a self-styled me kind of enlightenment, and actually becomes a Buddha, then the causes and conditions that brought that about or allowed that to open in such a fruitful way, probably pretty hidden. So coming back to it, I would say that your sitting practice, notice, witness the grasping. Don't cut. You can't cut. You can't cut down a tree, to use a kind of a dumb metaphor. You can't cut down a tree that has been growing for years, and also you're 300 feet away from it. Even if you have a 10-foot long knife or saw, you're too far away. Just using that as an image. We need to really get close to that negativity, and that is not comfortable, because in the ego mind, the self-centered mind, the seventh consciousness, the mind that's looking for results, the mind that's trying to avoid failure, the mind that actually wants something else in the form of enlightenment, or in the form of no more delusion, no more desire. It's a misunderstanding, and it's a powerful one. Not that there aren't teachers and teachings going way back, valid, very reputable, wonderful, enlightened masters that may try to teach in the way of trying to get you to actually cut the desire. My understanding of it is that you don't have to do anything with a desire, but don't take your eyes off from it and don't fuel it and don't justify it. That's a sneaky one there. Well, I'm working really hard on this, so it's okay if I do that. We're not trying to say you shouldn't want to have a good meal and enjoy yourself and want to have clothes that fit and are comfortable and protection from the elements and so on. We're not saying, I'm not saying that we shouldn't function in the world in that way, in a relative way that's reasonable. So it's the desire and the attachment, once we get it, to hang on to it. Nothing lasts. So even if you have some of the most painful ones is you have a mother that you're very attached to and she dies. You have a teacher that you're very attached to and she dies. So not always so. Not always so. You're not going to get your way particularly. So coming back to the title or the Dharma talk topic is how to cut desire and attachment. And then the last part of that is and attain enlightenment through exertion. Then the kind of exertion the word that I like to use for that is persistence. Not so much a pushing, but just return to the cushion, return to the study, return to the Sangha. It's even said in our vows, I vow to return to Buddha, return to Dharma, return to Sangha. It is done. Just continue to do that. You use that, even if it seems kind of, maybe corny. But quite often, ego will come up with that kind of thing. This is kind of foolish. Then people, way back when I started practicing under Trungpa Rinpoche as my guru, it was very, very, it was very difficult for me to work with I'm going to say it directly, very kind of stupid images, the cartoon images of the deities and everything. It's irritating to see all these beings that had all kinds of fancy stuff. I've been studying Zen, which is black and white. And then you find out later that they have all kinds of brocade and fancy stuff too. It didn't show up in the States. It was over in Japan from the last 1,000 years or so. So it's not about our interpretation or our adaptations or our comments about about the form that appears. It's about a stark, intense, all-pervading awareness of whatever's moving. Whatever's moving in your mind stream, that's it. That's the object of meditation for you. And if you disagree, then that's fine. You should trust yourself. Do whatever you need to do. But if you listen to me and if you give me the benefit of the doubt for a few minutes, look at what's moving. Sit down, hold still, watch the movement, and that part of observing has a very open quality. There's not particularly a desire for something else, or even for that. And since there's no particular desire happening, there's also the attachment part doesn't show up. If you go back through the 12 links and look at those area of the from the 6th link on, a pretty good description of how something happens, contact, and we want it, and we go after it, and we hook up on it, and then we got it, and now we become something else, some other situation. It's just a way of talking about it. Who knows what happens? I certainly don't. So the whole idea of cutting could apply maybe for 50 people that might be listening to this, or a few people might be magnetized or inspired by this way of talking about consciousness, the Dharma. And some people might have a literal kind of cutting activity that would happen, whereas another person wouldn't have that at all. Wouldn't have that metaphor of the blade or a knife or something would not resonate some other way. Something else might show up. Something about just seeing the gaps between things. If you see what it is, no interpretation, just if you see what it is, there's nothing to do. But up until that point, you may have to cut some things. Just like if you're going to practice at the monastery, you're going to cut your ties to some extent, or at least reduce them or minimize them to all of your other activities that happened before you became a practitioner. You don't have to do away with them. Even the people who are fully ordained as monks, we're not going to avoid our society. We're in the society. It's a crazy society. You guys with me on that? Crazy society. Yeah. And it may come to an end. And there are people who will tell you, you need to get out on the street and march with everybody else. And maybe you do. If you think you do, go for it. Keep me posted. But I'm not going to argue with what's happening in your mind stream, and you shouldn't either. If you haven't noticed the way that I teach, I don't give many orders other than just observe, train your mind, train your mind. This is not a belief. There's nothing to believe here. The way people believe things is based on a relative understanding of this is valuable and that's not valuable. It's subtle forms of negativity, positivity, duality. You don't have to do that. How do I know? I don't know. But if you read Kobunchi Roshi's translation of the mantra out of the Heart Sutra, falling apart, falling apart, falling apart. Everything just fell apart. Everything that looked like it was something just fell apart. And then I think his final couple of words there was nothing to do. And the last one was everything all at once. It's just everything all at once is just a way of saying nothing is separate. It's just an incredibly powerful illusion that has us all entranced through our whole lifetime. If you see, to be very, very specific, if you see a particular area of your consciousness that arises in terms of wanting something else, and you do anything with it, if you try to shut down on, I don't want to desire that. You try to, you misunderstand the cutting and think, and you think or assume or conclude that you need to stop that. This is a misunderstanding. And it's not that another teaching might not help people in that way. Fine. But if you're listening to me, then we have a connection. Whatever our connection is, it comes from your end. My connection is choiceless. I don't choose anybody. So you determine how this works for you. If I don't see you anymore, I might miss you, but I'm not going to chase you down. So if you can see the way anything arises in your mind stream, and you either want it or you don't want it, very simply put, just if you can, just stay with that. And when I say stay with it, I'm not saying maintain. If you look at its qualities and its parts, anything that looks like one thing that's showing up, you're imputing, to use the fancy word. You are imagining that. That's the imaginary nature. And the interesting thing about the imaginary nature is it will try to look like one thing. Well, it's just this, because it's propaganda, but it's not. It is made up of countless numbers of parts. And if you begin to look at the parts, the aspects, you could start out. When I say how to do this, I'm going to give you something you've heard me say in many ways before, but how to do that is to whatever shows up, I want it. And rather than convert it, what you want, immediately into anger because you're not getting it, or immediately into distraction or disenchantment or delusion or all the other D words. Instead of doing that, just see the parts of that. Just witness, just be aware of what shows up as that dissatisfaction has a lot of snake eyes, a lot of shadows and interstices and connections that are coming apart and other connections that are coming together. I call it texture, the texture of the feeling. and you can actually witness, you can be aware of that, the way in which that works. And then there's a possibility of, rather than actual cutting, the cutting action may be more like the sword of Manjushri, that it's an invisible sword that has invisible edges. But if something is struck with that invisible sword, because of its fundamental nature of not being two, uh, it no longer can maintain some kind of separation that is based on right and wrong, up and down, back and forth, life and death, any of the separations. It just comes apart, and there aren't any shadows left. And it's not particularly a feeling of joy or bliss, or the lack of passion, aggression, and ignorance. Nothing is missing. Nothing is gathered. It's seen. You actually see it. I use the visual word, but you could also say you could hear it. You can smell it. You can feel it. You can taste it. And it's yours. I don't own it. I don't own anything. I'm not an owner. I can barely give a Dharma talk. If you was able to hear what was happening in my mind 20 minutes ago, you'd be astonished that I could even do this. Or maybe not. Maybe you think, whatever, he's always making stuff up. Wisdom is co-emergent. When wisdom arises, if wisdom arises, then delusion arises at the same time. So you're not going to be able to cut that to shreds. If you have questions, I'd be happy to respond to them.
Sokuzan bowing.
Yes.
Is dissolving another way of looking at cutting?
Yes, it could. What if the awareness itself will cut? The awareness itself will dissolve. The awareness will itself just aware. There's nothing to be aware of. That's why it cuts. So that's why it dissolves. That's why it takes apart the self-love, the pride of self, the self-love, the self-reference. It just dismantles that whole structure just by, it's just like a brilliant light in a room where even though there are things in the room, because of the nature of light, it does not have a source. We get our metaphor for light from the big ball of fire off in the distance. That's where that shows up. But the nature of light itself has no source. There's no darkness. And it's not something you attain. It's something you realize. You actually realize it's always been that way. More?
Dallas has a question.
Dallas.
He asks, what about what is in your heart stream?
If you have a lot of bologna in your heart stream, then if there's enough to make a sandwich, then I'd recommend you go ahead to do that. I'm not being disrespectful to you, but I have met you. I know you. I understand what you're dealing with. Don't go there. Stay with what arises. Sit down, hold still, look at the wall. What's happening in the heart stream is extra.
Sokuzan has a question. Mm-hmm. She asks, what was going through your mind 20 minutes ago?
I can tell you, but you won't necessarily understand it. But I'll tell you anyway. I will tell you in any case. Nothing. Well, maybe a little bit like, what the hell's going on? Maybe that kind of thing. What am I going to do now? Not separate. You're not separate from anything, anywhere. If you realize that, your personal life is pretty much shot in the ass. This doesn't mean you won't have a cup of coffee. It doesn't mean that you won't do individual things. I walked around the yard and watered some of the trees in my underwear. That wasn't particularly an accomplishment, just something I did. But nothing was arising. I didn't even know I was going to be doing this. I completely slipped my mind.
Wendy has a question.
Yes, Wendy.
When we cut the energy of desire or of anything else, where does that energy go?
Goes back to its original owner. Good question. You stopped stealing finally. You finally understood the precepts. Anytime you think, you're stealing that energy from the fundamental nature of everything, which is not separate.
Sokuzan bowing. If we continuously abandon our awareness for our thoughts and opinions, can we ever cut through desire and attachment?
Yes,
Bowing.
yes, you can. You can, because the way you said, if we continue to do that, it's the awareness that you're doing that. It's not stopping it. Don't interfere with a moving train. Just watch the train. Nothing lasts. Eventually it changes or stops, or it opens up, or you saw a part where the cut is just, it's like your mind is like a hot butter knife and it just goes right through it. It's choiceless and it is effortless. But you have to see it. You can't imagine that it's doing it, even though some trainings, especially in the tantric tradition, create imaginary passion. Dissolve it. That's a valid way also.
Sokuzan bowing.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
When we start taking responsibility for our feelings, does that stop us from taking things so personally? Bowing.
I think over time, when you realize that the feelings don't belong to anybody. So how do you do that? The way I talk about responsibility is that you respond directly to whatever is happening. There doesn't need to be a me taking responsibility, blaming myself for my feelings, or taking credit for my feelings, or taking a kick in the ass for my feelings. So yes, it's just the ability to respond. Something happens, you're there. You see it, you smell it, you taste it, you feel it, you hear it, you think it. Nothing else, nothing extra. This is the ability to respond to responsibility. I could say it in a more precise and literal way, but you may not particularly care for it, and you might not even know what kind of questions to ask about it. But you're to blame for everything. There isn't anything that isn't your fault. That's your fault. This is your fault. This is your fault. That's your fault. Fault. Why? Because none of that is your fault. Not two. Anytime you say this, you say the opposite. Anytime you think this, you think the opposite. That's because the very nature of this reality is relative truth is divided up. And here we are in the middle of it. Isn't it kind of amazing that you're a living being and you completely disappear at night into a who knows what, and then you wake back up and here you are. Now you got to go take a shower. Who thought that up? How'd that come about?
Sokuzan.
Yes.
Sokuzan bowing. That feels contrary to the belief in right and wrong. So how can we begin to create some space around that defensiveness?
Of course, its general response is refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. It's an incredible formula for kind of catching you no matter what direction you go. If the teaching person doesn't catch you or stop you or point it out, then the wall gazing will do that. And if that doesn't do it, then just running into other people that are practicing the same thing with the same teacher and the same inspiration and are fully ordained as monks that piss you off. As long as you as a monk are getting upset or blaming others for how you're feeling, you got some work to do. And I don't care how good of a Dharma teacher you are. I'm not talking just to you specifically, anybody. Therefore, you're not going to see me giving Dharma transmission to anybody unless they understand what this is. Or at least understand it in a way that they're not going to make other people's lives miserable by blaming them. If you're having a feeling, that's yours. And when I say it's yours, not an ego yours, not yours as the self-centered aspect of it. Generosity is complete receiving, complete receiving. It makes me want to weep to say that. Excuse me, but it makes me want to weep to say that to you because it's so obvious. And every one of you, including you, Jason, are shutting down on it. You're shutting it out. Don't shut it out. Don't shut it out. And how do you do that? You see the way you shut out. But if you see the way you shut out and you try to stop shutting out, you only that way you have emphasized the reality of that shutting out in such a way that you've brought it into the level of relative truth, and you try to manipulate it as if it were fixing a lawnmower. So I'm saying all you have to do is see it. If you see it, because there isn't anyone seeing it, please ask your question, Jason.
I'm bowing. Can we see what this is and still feel bad or defensive when we're accused of something?
There's any other way to do it. If someone gets upset with me, I'm not like this floating surface of wisdom, like oil slick on the water that doesn't know about the depth. No, there isn't any separation between you and anything. So therefore, you may feel horrible feelings. You may have horrible feelings of different times. I've had students of mine that have misunderstood what I'm trying to do for them, with them, and they've accused me of stuff. And what do? I let them. I don't do too much in the way of defending. I might say, well, I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Good luck. So this doesn't mean that I didn't do something wrong or say something that braided them or scared them or offended them or something. I'm not saying everybody's running away, but quite a few people, considering how I feel about them, how much I care about them and want to help them, and they're not ready for it yet. They're not ready for this kind of help. So therefore, they either run away or else they keep their distance and kind of check in with me now and then, like once a year, once every 6 months. That's okay. That's their business to do that. But you're not going to get rid of the emotions and the feelings. They could increase. Look at the vow. Look at the vow. Be with all things. That means everything. All the negative feelings that you've ever thought or anyone has ever had is coming your way. And it can knock you right off your feet if you can't take it all at once. So there's still that filter that keeps you from seeing everything all at once, as Kuan Yin, Avalokiteshvara, the sound observer, looked down on the suffering of the world and was overwhelmed. His Holiness the 16th Karmapa walking out on his balcony, and I think it was in Hong Kong, way back in the 70s somewhere, and was so overwhelmed by what he saw, he collapsed. Rangjung Rikpi Dorji. And all he saw was just millions of people in a huge city suffering. That doesn't mean that he, see this 16th Karmapa, he could just kind of shut that off and on. No, you're at the mercy of the world from then on. And what am I saying? You could do that. Just do it. If there's a strong self that's operates out of fear, a strong self that operates out of intense desire for something else, then we come back to cut desire and attachment. And of course, the other line is attain enlightenment through exertion. And that exertion is not lifting muscles or lifting weights. It's just a strong attitude of, I'm going to see what this is. I'm going to see this. I am going to see this. Might feel like ego, but that's when the very desire for an awakening begins to transcend the awakening itself. It no longer is a relative situation. There is no one who awakens. Go ahead, please.
What do you mean when you said that you're not that important?
Me? I said I wasn't important.
When you said that to me, you said that to me that you're not that. I like me, Chiazon. You said to me.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, you're not
that
important.
important.
I wouldn't say that about myself. Of course, I'm important. Did I say that you're not that important?
In reference to when I'm trying to understand or figure out how to not trigger or not be this way or that.
Yes, thank you. I'm ready to respond. It's not that there isn't someone there, but that someone that's there, actually, it's not a criticism. It's just, it's literally you as a separate being, an ego being, a seventh consciousness being with those four aspects of self-pride, self-reference, love of self, and whatever that fourth one is. It's not that doesn't come together and try to do stuff, but it's a failure. It's a setup. It's a setup because you're going to die, and everything's going to die. Everything that shows up is going away. So when you say you're not that important, you're not as a singularity, as a person. So therefore, if you see that, then the duality of extreme arrogance and extreme humility are not two different things. There's no longer anything to locate. There's no longer anyone that locates anything. Even though there's a body-mind complex that sits there on a cushion or sits here in the chair, there isn't anyone. So when I say not that important, I'm just saying, even though there's that importance in our mind, oh my gosh, what am I? This feels terrible. I don't even know why I'm feeling so bad or so depressed or so this or so that. The causes and conditions that create any given emotion or feeling or hope or fear are untraceable. So you could just look at the bare surface of it. And then if you see the bare immediacy of any given situation without trying to find out why, or go on a witch hunt, just look at the situation itself, because that will take you into a labyrinth that you couldn't discover if you were going on a witch hunt. It will take you into the fundamental dependent origination that comes about, and it's not about the history of something. About, well, this happened, my mother treated me this way, and I was in the 13th century. I was I was tortured or hung by the neck. I'm not saying that those aren't part of it, but you don't necessarily, maybe in some cases, but you don't necessarily have to go back and get rid of that or shut it down or take the power out of it. Perhaps there's no formula that's going to work. Even Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is such a specific formula, and yet very vague. Have you noticed how vague it is? Community, what's being talked about, and what she's saying. How's that going to help us? Yes.
Greg has a question.
Greg B.
Greg Bowing, yes. Is it okay to be miserable if I am okay with that? I ask, as my miserable mood seems to have an effect on others around me. Thank you.
That's their problem. I'm not saying you can just, walk through the living room and knock over the coffee table because you're feeling like crap. But I'm saying, and you could even say, you could even apologize or say, sorry for my bad mood today. But you don't necessarily have to go in and try to be somebody else, try to change it into something else, or be ashamed of yourself. It's just it is a quality of the mind that can show up in a personal way, like weather. It's pretty hard to tell someone who has a migraine, like some of us do. I don't, but some people do have intense migraines. So this is just weather. No, painful. Painful. That would be just like I would say about my back pain. It's just weather. No, it's pain. And what do you do with it? Insofar as you can, just receive it. Just receive. The causes and conditions that are behind that are probably untraceable. It depends. It's not always so. So there's no formula that's going to work. That's why the way that I teach is pretty open-ended. Everybody I meet is somebody else, is somebody totally different than I've ever met before. I don't have a particular protocol other than to say, train your mind. And then if you talk to me about it, I'll help you. I'll tell you how to do that if you give me permission. If you don't, I'll just be your friend. I'll listen to you. But each person needs to do this differently. Some of you know, I'm not going to pick anybody out, but some people know that they're doing a practice nobody else is doing. Not particularly a sales pitch, because they all fail. I'm sure you noticed.
Katie has a question.
Katie,
I think she's.
on YouTube.
I have observed deep into my feelings for some time, and what I am finding is deep-seated anger at everyone. I can't breathe. How can I release this in a healthy way and stop being bound by my anger?
Stop trying to release it. You can't win that war. Stop trying to release the anger. Stop trying to cut the anger, release the anger. Don't work on something that you don't have a clear view of. What am I saying? I'm saying train your mind. This is not, we've been around here for millions of years, thousands anyway. But here we are, and this particular, what do we call this, a moment where you're, Katie, you're asking me a question, and my response is not just coming out of just an old man sitting here who thought up a bunch of really neat things to talk about. I'm saying to you as straightforwardly as I can, you're going to have to train your mind. And that might mean spending a whole lot of time doing something that the ego mind thinks is a waste of time, your particular ego mind. And so what I'm saying is sit down, schedule it. If you can't live at the monastery, you can do it in your house. Make a part of your house some kind of area that is a dedicated place, an altar. So if you haven't done that already, which you probably have, but set it up. An hour a day is not going to do this. You all know this. An hour is not going to do it. It's going to have to be more than that, maybe a lot more. Sit down, hold still, and watch the movement so that you eventually, over time, the awareness, by watching what moves, eventually the awareness begins to see the root of the anger. You can't think your way into this. If you start to think, you might as well, you're going another way, and you might find some really interesting things. You might be able to write a book on psychology, especially if you're smart. You're very smart, not a compliment, but you're smart. So I would say you don't have to do anything, just train your mind. And how do you do that? You see how untrained it is. If you sit down and hold still and you watch the thing, you watch your whole consciousness continue to dump on you this and that and this feeling and that feeling and going this direction, going that direction. Just observe. Do a lot of it. That's why we have block sitting. Do block sitting. Something that is a good form to sit down, hold still, do nothing for 4 hours. If you can't live in a monastery, then that's a good approach to take. Yes.
Her follow-up comment is, I'm exhausted.
Well, then take a nap. I'm not being sarcastic. I'm saying take some time off. Take some time off. And I'm literally saying don't meditate for a week. So you get some contrast out of it. Instead of meditating a little bit, then just stop for a while. but set up a forum for it. Don't do it casually or some kind of impulse. And I've told other people to do this in different ways, different forums, because people come with different kinds of their resistance shows up in different ways. Excuse me.
Sokuzan has a question.
Certainly.
She asks, if an hour a day isn't going to do this, to quote you, how do we work with our situation if that's the most we can set aside?
It's dependently arisen. So therefore, yes, and you're in a situation where you're married, have a job, and have 2 children. So your situation is going to be much different. You're not going to be able to carve out 4 or 5 hours or something. Perhaps, we could talk about it, just you and I at some point. There's no requirement. It's up to you. We might be able to find a way to work with that might bring it all together in a lump, like a block sitting. If you could find some way to get that time in where you're totally free of any obligations for a 4-hour period. 4 hours seems to be about an hour longer than 3. Have you noticed that? Good idea. 3 is not enough, not for a block sit. It's good. Sit 3, and it's 3 hours of sitting, and it's still valid. But the crunch that comes in that last hour, and this is generally, I'm not saying that some people could sit 2.5 hours and have a deep effect on training the mind to see more clearly. Of course it could. I'm just kind of generalizing. So maybe 3 hours is good. Anybody that's sitting 3 hours a day or 3 hours every other day and calling that a block sit, I'm fine with that. Do whatever you want to do. Further questions? Maria.
You encourage us to become familiar with grasping or any negativity. I'm just wondering, what is that familiarity?
So it could be very uncomfortable. It could be painful. Getting familiar, because we might have spent the last 20, 30 years hiding out from it, pushing it away. And now we're doing sitting meditation, and we might have developed a way in sitting meditation to continue to get about it. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying it seems to be necessary to do quite a bit of sitting practice, in order to have that area that seems to be a boundary or barrier to seeing more deeply, to have that be seen through or become more transparent. Did I respond to your question in a way that's helpful, or you have another one?
Maria Bowing. I'm wondering if there is any connection between that familiarity and that overwhelmed, which you mentioned when you talk about. I don't remember who was in Hong Kong on the balcony who was overwhelmed by the suffering.
Rangjung Rigpe Dorje, the 16th Dharma. Yes, go ahead, please.
So I'm wondering whether that familiarity can actually lead to this kind of overwhelm.
Good. Sometimes I get overwhelmed that I can't hardly stand up. But that doesn't mean I'm some kind of great being or some great bodhisattva. There isn't anyone. There is no solid being. As long as whatever is left here continues to show up, and people show up as students, I'll continue to talk. Seeing that there isn't anyone then there's no more reference point. The only reference point you have is everybody else. No guarantees of anything. You may practice the rest of your life, and as Trungpa Rinpoche once said, you may not attain enlightenment, but at least you'll stop being a nuisance to everyone. That's a pretty direct quote, I think. I haven't managed that. I'm still not enlightened, and I'm still bothersome to people, and I intend to keep it up. Any further questions?
And then he,
Take another question if you have it. Otherwise, we can close. It's noon, so we can certainly stop. Okay, stop.
and I'd just like to remind everybody about our this Saturday is the all day. We'll be doing it virtually, but you can watch on email or join us
Yes,
so we can dedicate the merit from the monastery Zendo.
the monastery Zendo. Okay. So take it over there, monastery Zendo. We'll shut off our microphone.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Ji-o san chi chi hu shi son bu sa mu bu sa the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.
I'll get mine too.